All right, let's dive into this Max Weber thing, the Protestant ethic and the spirit of capitalism. I gotta say, just looking at these excerpts you gave me, this is like one of those ideas that really changes how you see the world.
It's a classic for a reason, yeah.
Yeah.
Weber was really trying to figure out, how do cultures evolve? Not just their religions, but how people rationalize things and what that means for their economies. It's fascinating stuff.
Yeah. Okay, rationalize, though. That sounds like one of those academic words that could mean anything.
Right.
What's the simpler version?
Sure. Think of it as how societies apply logic in order, to different aspects of life.
Yeah.
And Weber noticed that the West took a very specific path, especially when it came to money and work. He saw a very powerful and controversial link between the rise of capitalism and the Protestant Reformation, specifically the Calvinists.
Right, that's like Weber's big idea in a nutshell. And back then, it was a pretty bold challenge to that Marxist idea that economics was like the only force shaping history. It's like he was saying, hold on, ideas matter too.
Yeah, exactly. Economics is hugely important, of course, but you can't ignore beliefs and how they shape the way people act.
Yeah.
He wasn't saying that Protestantism caused capitalism,
Right.
but it was like this key ingredient in how the West developed. Kind of like ideas have consequences.
Yeah. So maybe Protestantism didn't directly cause capitalism, but it created like the perfect environment for it. Kind of like,
I don't know.
fertile soil or something.
That's a great analogy.
Yeah.
And this brings us to another key point. Weber really believed that history is messy.
Ah.
He rejected simple explanations. This particular moment in time was unique. Lots of factors converging.
Okay, so let's talk about this. This spirit of capitalism thing that Weber keeps talking about. He uses Benjamin Franklin as like the prime example, right? But to be honest, some of those quotes, like, time is money, always felt kind of obvious to me.
Right.
What was so radical about Franklin's ideas?
Well, you have to think about the historical context. To the ancient Greeks, to the Romans even. Franklin's emphasis on frugality and earning money, that would sound to like pure greed, not virtues. The fact that we now see them as like common sense shows how much our thinking has been shaped by this spirit.
So it wasn't just that Franklin was good with money, it was his whole moral framework.
Exactly. And that's where the Protestant work ethic comes in, certain Protestant sects. The Calvinists in particular believe that work itself was a calling from God, something you do with serious dedication.
But wasn't there also this idea of predestination in Calvinism? This belief that God had already chosen who was saved and who wasn't? How did that fit in with all this work ethic stuff?
That's what makes it so interesting. Imagine the psychological pressure of believing that your eternal fate was already decided. You couldn't earn your way into heaven.
Wow, yeah. So how did people cope with that?
Worldly success was a way of looking for reassurance. It wasn't about enjoying riches, but seeing prosperity as a sign of God's favor. That created incredibly powerful motivation.
So it wasn't about luxury. It was about proving your worth through work and material success.
Yeah, it wasn't about enjoying wealth. It was about the accumulation of it.
Yeah.
As like an outward sign of an inward state.
Okay, I think I'm following. But then there's this idea of worldly asceticism, which seems like a complete contradiction. How can you deny yourself worldly pleasures and also be striving for economic gain?
That paradox is at the heart of what Weber's arguing. Protestants rejected the trappings of wealth, luxury, idleness, frivolous spending, all of that. And that denial freed them to focus intensely on economic activity.
So are there any like specific examples of that in the text? It's hard to imagine people actually living that way.
Weber uses some vivid examples, like the Puritans' restrictions on the theater, their disapproval of fancy clothes, or even just lavish meals. They emphasize reinvesting profits back into businesses instead of spending it on themselves. It's a pretty different mindset.
Yeah, for sure. So they were kind of like building a kingdom of God here on earth, but through hard work and economic success.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to put it. And it wasn't just individuals either. This mindset had a ripple effect on entire societies. Think about the rise of the middle class, the decline of feudalism, the development of legal systems that supported capitalism. It's all interconnected.
Right, but isn't it a bit of a stretch to say that religious beliefs alone could reshape societies like that? I mean, there had to be other factors, right?
Oh, of course. Weber wasn't naive to the complexities of history. That's why he did all that research. Comparing Western societies to the East, he found that those societies, shaped by different beliefs, didn't develop the same kind of capitalism as the West.
Yeah, that's right. He looked at Confucianism, Hinduism, and Judaism, right? What did those comparisons tell him?
Well, take Confucianism, for example. It values harmony and social order. but it doesn't have that same drive for individual achievement and accumulation that you see in Protestantism. In Confucianism, the goal is to fulfill your obligations to society, not necessarily to maximize your personal wealth.
So it's not that other religions were against economic success. They just didn't give it the same spiritual significance.
Precisely. And Hinduism, for instance, focuses on spiritual liberation and the cycle of reincarnation. There were wealthy merchants in those societies, but material wealth wasn't the main path to spiritual fulfillment.
Okay, now I'm starting to see how this whole rationalization thing fits in. It's almost as if Western culture had this unique relationship with economic activity, and it was all fueled by this Protestant worldview.
You got it. That's exactly what Weber was getting at, this particular form of rationalization, emphasizing hard work, frugality, worldly success as a sign of God's favor. It had a huge impact on the trajectory of Western civilization.
It's kind of wild to think about, honestly, that this might have been a truly unique moment in history, this perfect storm of factors that Weber describes. What happens to capitalism now, when so many people don't hold those religious beliefs anymore?
That's the million-dollar question. Weber's work is an amazing lens for understanding the past. But it also throws down this challenge. What are the driving forces behind capitalism in the 21st century?
It makes you wonder, what's pushing us all to work so hard and accumulate wealth if it's not for some greater spiritual purpose? Is it just, as you said, a million-dollar question? Or are there some clues out there?
Well, Weber actually thought about this. He knew that the religious passion of the early Protestants wouldn't last. He even speculated that capitalism, once it broke free from its religious roots, might become an iron cage.
An iron cage? That sounds kind of ominous. What did he mean by that?
He worried that the constant pursuit of efficiency and profit, without a higher moral purpose, could trap us in a system without a soul, like we might become cogs in a machine, driven by economic forces we can't control.
So it's like capitalism could become a victim of its own success. It achieves this incredible material prosperity, but maybe at the cost of our spiritual and ethical values.
That was definitely one of Weber's concerns. And it's become even more relevant today, as we struggle with things like income inequality, climate change, the erosion of community.
Wow, yeah. It's a lot to think about. It makes you wonder if we need a new reformation, like a reevaluation of our values and priorities in this new economic landscape. But aren't there already signs of that happening?
Oh, absolutely. We see it in the growing interest in ethical consumption, sustainable business practices, social justice movements. People are demanding more from corporations, governments, even themselves.
It's funny, even listening to this, I've been thinking about my own work ethic. Why do I push myself so hard? Is it for some higher purpose? Or am I just chasing, that dopamine hit of a successful project? I'm starting to think that maybe...
Yeah, that tension, that's something Weber was really aware of. Yeah. He knew that the religious passion of those early Calvinists wouldn't last. But he also believed, even in a world where those old certainties are gone, we can still find meaning. We can still find purpose.
That's a hopeful thought. But where do we even start looking for that meaning? In a system that feels like it's always putting profit above everything else.
I think.
Yeah.
Weber would tell us to do some serious self-reflection. What are our values? How do they affect our work, our spending, our choices as consumers and citizens?
So it's like pull. He's giving us homework. Go figure out what you believe in, and then let those beliefs guide your actions.
Exactly.
Wow.
That's a powerful message to end on, I think. We've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive, but hopefully you've come away with more than just information. You get a new way of looking at things, at this complex relationship between religion, culture, and economics.
Yeah, and maybe even a desire to keep exploring, to keep asking questions, and to keep shaping the world around us. After all, history isn't set in stone. We all have the power to make choices, to create a future that reflects our values.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Yeah.
Well, on that note, I think it's time to wrap up our deep dive.
Yeah. Thanks for taking us on this journey. It's been a pleasure.
The pleasure was all mine.
To our listener, keep learning, keep thinking, and keep pushing the boundaries of what you know. Thanks for joining us.